Good morning. I'm always looking for ways to help explain the four elements that makes it applicable for people in their lives. Because I think sometimes what happens, at least indirectly, I get feedback that people get it and they're just like, yeah, because we hear awareness, forgiveness, surrender, and vision. They're all part of any type of self-help, uh, personal development program. Those are usually common themes that you will find, and that's part of why they ended up as being four essential elements for evolution, because they are recurring themes. But I think what happens is people will often look at them, or they'll read something I've written, and it will just become another thing, like a to-do, like, oh, I have to do this framework if I want to evolve. What I'd like to explain is, yes, it's something you do, but what's happening most of the time is it's something that we're kind of all doing unconsciously. And when we start to see this framework and use it consciously, we harness our creative abilities a lot more. So what I'm going to do today is I have two different visuals, and they're both in my book, and they're visuals that I use regularly, kind of how we relate to the four elements. And I've written some notes because I want to make sure I don't forget anything important. But like always, there's awareness, forgiveness, vision, and surrender. And kind of initially when you start working with the four elements, at least when I did, this was kind of how I saw it. I saw it kind of as this process of working through these, or kind of tapping into the element that I needed at the time, given the circumstance or whatever. And so often we can start with awareness. And this is the important thing to remember about awareness. We can seek change, but it will continue to elude us as long as we continue to operate from our conditioned awareness. And this was an observation that Einstein made as well. I believe it was Einstein that said something about, we cannot solve a problem from the same awareness that created it. And so that's why awareness is essential for personal evolution, for development, change. If we are operating from the same mindset, same perception, and we're assuming our current perception to be an accurate representation of what's happening, we will experience little change, because we will default to the patterns, to the conditioning that we've been operating off of since we were conditioned by family, religion, culture, all of that. Whatever our conditioning is, our personal experiences that we've had, where we've maybe experienced some trauma that embeds some conditioning in us, conditioned responses. So the idea is we must expand our awareness. We have to find a way to expand our awareness, or our perception, or how we relate to life, if we ever expect anything different from our current experience. And that's really challenging, because it's like and for me, this was one of the biggest things when I first participated in Dr. Dispenza's workshop, is he said, become aware of what you're unaware of. And you're kind of stuck, because if I'm perceiving life through my own perception, how do I get beyond that? And while I don't have it written up here, what I talk about in the book, or if you look at my online course, is there's two qualities: the intention to be aware, and curiosity. When we intend to be aware, and we're thinking, okay, this is something I want to do, I want to expand my awareness, and then as things come up in our lives, when we default to curiosity instead of judgment is our default to what we know, what we think we know, what we think is real. But when we lean into a little bit of curiosity and say, what's here for me, we start asking questions, or even if we don't know the right question to ask, just to kind of hold that curious space, like, wait a second, what's here? What's the emotion that's coming up for me? What am I not seeing that's happening here? When we can be in a state of curiosity, believe it or not, whether you want to call it your higher mind, or the universe, or God, or however you relate to the reality that's bigger than the current one you're experiencing, responds to that. Like, there is this exchange with the universe that wants us to live in a bigger world, a more inclusive world. And so when we become curious and we have the intention to be aware, that will automatically begin to cultivate within us. And then forgiveness, I have it listed as the second thing, because it's not about letting go. Like we always say, oh, forgive, live and let live, let go, let go. And that's kind of a side effect of forgiveness. Like the letting go comes natural. So it's less about letting go of the past, but more accurately, it's about integrating an aspect of our past to create an identity that serves us. So we have something happen, we do something that we feel guilty about. There's an event. There's an event that we have an emotional response to that attaches us to the past. And so there's this part of us that's like reliving it in our head over and over. I wished I'd have done it different. I wish that hadn't happened to me. That person needs to apologize to me. Whatever that emotion is that attaches us in the past, when we get stuck in thinking we want that thing that happened to be different, we're stuck in the past. And so when we shift our mindset and say, this is what happens, and we'll see how that relates to surrender when we come back around to surrender. But when we sit there in forgiveness, it's about deliberate perception of how we relate to ourselves based on past events. And so the thing happened, we have the response. That emotional response is actually feedback for us. It's telling us, is this good? And Heather Ashamara, I think it was, she likes to say when that emotional response is like, yes, I would like more of this, please, or no, I don't like that. And so that emotional response isn't our identity, and that's usually where we get stuck, is we have the emotional response and we get stuck right there. But that response is actually telling us, wait a second, this is out of alignment for me. It doesn't feel good. So the forgiveness comes by default when we say, when we ask ourselves, who am I as a result of this event? So this event happened, and who am I as a result of it? All too often, we will default to a victim identity, and that's holding something outside of ourselves responsible. That's giving our power away. That doesn't mean you weren't victimized in a sense. A lot of times we're victims of our own poor thinking, but it doesn't mean you weren't victimized by them. But then we victimize ourselves by assuming that they get to dictate our identity based on that. And that's not to say there isn't sometimes stuff that we have to work through. Like maybe we do need to get therapy. Maybe we do, I don't know, in whatever form that therapy comes in. Maybe there are real concrete things that we have to go do to work through that. But it's recognizing that based on that event, I actually still get to choose who I am. And that can be hard because we think, well, this person did something really hurtful. But that might cause us to examine our boundaries. Like, do I set healthy boundaries? This person has repeatedly done this thing. And I sit here going, I'm trying to forgive you. I'm trying so hard to forgive you and be a better person and forgive you. But I'm staying here. I'm staying here in this environment with this person that's hurting me over and over again. And there comes a point where when we go into awareness, we're like, wait a second. I have a choice. I love this person. It hurts me to leave this person, but it hurts more to stay here. And I love myself enough when we're in that place of awareness, when we go, wait a second. I love myself enough that I'm going to make the hard choice to leave. And then when we do that and we begin to empower ourselves, that idea of letting go, like it happens organically because we're loving ourselves enough. We're deliberately choosing based on all these events, whether it's things we've done too. When we've made, I've done it plenty of times and I still do it. When I'm a jerk to somebody and I feel guilty or I feel bad about something I said or something I did, and I still do it. It'll roll around in my head for a while until I remember, wait a second, I get to choose. I get to choose who I am every day and every moment. I get to choose. And that's something we all get to do. And as we do that, as we deliberately choose and we deliberately say, who am I as a result of this? And it can be something minuscule or it can be something significant. But when we're actively choosing our identity, that letting go happens. That forgiveness happens. It's saying, I don't have to be identified by this thing. Or more appropriately, I'm choosing who I want to be because this thing gave me some valuable feedback. So that's where we operate with forgiveness. And then vision, the thing about vision is it's all the things we dream of being, doing, or having. And so, like, most of the time in personal development, self-help, growth, all of that stuff, all of the things, you know, whether it's getting a degree or taking a class or having the house and the car and the spouse and whatever that vision for your life looks like, we often get stuck in the doing and the having. I'm going to do these things and I'm going to have these things and I'm going to be this great person because I'm going to do and have these things. All of those things, the doing and the having, they're all external to us. At the root of the vision is the being. It's who am I? When we start with the doing and the having, we are trying to change who we are by changing the external first. And I don't want to say it can't happen that way, but it generally, it's not as effective to do it that way, or you can do it that way. It might last a while. You are more inclined to experience setbacks, maybe get derailed, or when those externals go away, do you have the foundation of beingness to rebuild? Like when somebody doesn't have who isn't abundant in some way, they are materially poor, and they decide to manifest, they would probably do something like, okay, I'm going to manifest. So I'm going to have an abundant mindset and I'm going to express gratitude. And that expressing gratitude is really important and having the abundant mindset. And so we're changing that. And that's kind of the idea because we're working on our being, but that's that's kind of at the surface level of affecting the beingness. So when we're working with vision, I'm not saying don't use all the things you'd like to do or have. Like, that's the context. The doing and the having is the context, but beneath the surface of the doing and the having is the being. So if you're saying, I want to have material things and I want to do fun things, that vision of who you are is practicing the being part. And usually at the root of all of that, what we find, and I think where historically religion has provided this for people, and I think as our culture and society sort of shifts more to spirituality, and sometimes religion is becoming a little less rigid, we lose a little bit of the foundational values, because those historically, and I'm not speaking with any authority here, just kind of more observation, our religious organizations have promoted values, and I can appreciate, like, there's a whole conversation there that we don't need to have. We can have values without having religion. I just think historically that's kind of where they came from. And so we had things like honesty, compassion, loyalty, generosity, gratitude. Like, those were promoted as important ideals. So when we have those underneath our vision, and I'm not saying you have to have religion to have those in your life, I'm just saying if you haven't had something that created that foundation for you of identifying values that drive your life, I would encourage you to pull up a list online and start looking at values and thinking, making that connection between what are the values, the principles, the ethics, however you want to look at it. What are the values, the principles, and ethics that I am operating off of in my life? And how are they driving my choices? And so when we have that foundation of values, principles, and ethics, and we're making choices off of those, we become the person who does the things and has the things that we want. The doing and the having are a byproduct of the being. And that being, how it relates to forgiveness, is when we pass judgment based on an identity that doesn't serve us, and we're not operating from awareness. So we're passing judgment on an idea of who we are, and we're not getting outside of that. And we're saying, well, this is just who I am. I am poor. I'm the poor person trying to be rich. Well, you'll never be rich if your identity is continually being poor. When you're looking at that, you're saying, well, I've learned these lessons and now I'm beginning to understand what it is. So you're moving away from that identity, because your identity can change throughout your lifetime. I mean, that's what we are essentially as humans. We like to say, well, I'm just this or I'm just that. That concept of yourself is incredibly fluid, and it's much more fluid than we think it is. And that's the difference that's that gap in between forgiveness and vision, is we're creating that. And we don't create it from the outside in by doing and having things. We change the beingness, and the doing and having comes. And it doesn't mean we don't use the doing and having, but if that's your focus, if you're trying to use the doing and having to change your life, you're going to be grasping at straws, because the doing and having changes. Take a look at social media. New trends, or whatever, it's like the TikTok trend of the day or the week, whatever. It's changing all the time. And so if you're looking externally for an identity, you will always be chasing it. You will always be chasing it. That's why vision comes from ultimately foundational values. Those values remain unchanged. They remain unchanged through popular trends. They are always the same, and they will anchor you into a state of beingness that transcends the volatility of the external world. And then finally, surrender. Surrender says, I'm ultimately not in control. We surrender to the present moment, which means I'm surrendering to what is now. When we're stuck in that forgiveness loop, we're not surrendering to now, we're surrendering to something that happened. And so we're reliving it and reliving it and reliving it. When we surrender, we're bringing things into the present moment, and we're responding deliberately instead of reacting unconsciously to what is now. And when we respond deliberately, we're making that deliberate choice to move towards our vision. And so what is present in my reality now? When we're in surrender, we're saying, what's present in my reality now? And how do I respond to it that's in alignment with my vision? So initially, we'll go around in this loop, and I'm going to cut this video into 2 parts just to make it easier to download. So if you want to work with the 4 elements in this way to start kind of understanding how they operate in your life, this is where we start. So I'm going to pause the video, I'm going to restart it to have a second video, and we'll talk about how that kind of shifts, how the relation to the 4 elements shifts as you begin to use them more and more frequently.